The important thing to understand about how we define unemployment is who's included in the unemployment rate and who's not included, because we hear these unemployment numbers get released in the news. People are talking about unemployment a lot, but it's important to understand what that means and what it doesn't mean, right? So I'm going to go through a couple important takeaways from the video that you just watched about defining unemployment, and then we'll do a calculation example. All right, so first we want to think that we only start by considering the adult civilian non-institutionalized population. The adult civilian non-institutionalized population excludes people who are children, right? And that means actually by definition, anyone who is under the age of 16 is excluded, but anyone over 16 is included in the adult institutionalized population, non-institutionalized population, given that they're a civilian, right? So it excludes active duty military personnel, and it also excludes people living in institutions. And when we say institutions, that could mean somebody who's in jail. It could mean someone who's in a nursing home. Okay, a drug treatment facility, something like that. These people cannot hold regular employment and therefore are not included in this population of people who are eligible to be working. But everybody else, regardless of how old they are or their situation, is going to be included in the adult civilian non-institutionalized population. All right. So once we have our adult civilian non-institutionalized population, we can break that down into people who are in the labor force and people who are out of the labor force. These are people, of all the people who are eligible for work, right, who would like to be working and who would not like to be working, okay? And then from our labor force, we can break that down into two categories of people who are employed or people who are unemployed. Now, what gets reported in the news is usually the unemployment rate. And the unemployment rate is a ratio of the number of people who are unemployed divided by the number of people who are in the labor force. And a little bit less commonly cited in the news, but still important for understanding what's going on in the economy, is a labor force participation rate. That's here. That's the labor force participation rate, which is a kind of a wordy phrase, so we usually abbreviate that LFPR. And that's the number of people in the labor force divided by the adult civilian non-institutionalized population. So I've got some numbers here in this table to help us think about what that looks like in reality. And these are the actual job numbers, well, sorry, the actual employment numbers. The job numbers are from a different survey, but the actual employment numbers from last month, from March 2020. There's a lot of talk about what's going on in the labor market right now. So we've got here the adult civilian non-institutionalized population, and if you looked up this information in BLS, all of the numbers would be filled into this table, but I've left some of them out so that you can start to understand the relationship between these different variables, okay? So we've got our adult civilian non-institutionalized population, and then I've also given you the number of people who were employed and the number of people who are unemployed. So to get the civilian labor force, we would add together the number of people who are employed and the number of people who are unemployed. And these numbers are all in thousands, right? So this is actually 155 million plus 7 million. And then that's going to give me some number that I actually forgot to add up before I started this video, but I'll just do it really quick right here. And that's going to be 162,912, okay? So the labor force is made up of everyone who is employed, who is actively working, And to be employed, you only need to be working any number of hours. I mean, the question in the survey is actually, have you done anything for pay or profit in the last week? So anyone who mows a lawn and gets 20 bucks, they're going to be counted as employed. All right. And then to be unemployed, you have to not be employed. So you have no work for pay or profit. You also have to be actively looking for work and have been able to start a job. All right, so then how many people are not in the labor force here? Well, we can take then the difference between the adult, civilian, non-institutionalized population and our labor force, and that will tell me the answer. And that's going to be 96 million people. All right. Yeah, so we filled out our table. Let's go ahead and calculate the unemployment rate and the labor force participation rate for last month. So the labor force participation rate is going to be the number of people in the labor force divided by the number of people who could be in the labor force, right? The adult, civilian, non-institutionalized population. Okay, so that's going to give me, oops, 62.7%. And then the unemployment rate will be the number of people who are unemployed divided by the number of people in the labor force. So 7140 divided by 162,912. Okay, and that gives me 0.044 or 4.4%. Now, that was a lot lower than what we actually think the unemployment rate is right now. And that's because this survey that we collect data about people's employment, the current population survey, was last completed in the second week of March. And that was before any of the states had shelter-in-place orders instituted. So we think, okay, the last data that we actually have for unemployment is telling us we have an unemployment rate of about 4.4%, but economists are guessing that right now that's more like somewhere between 10 and 20%, you know, maybe 13, maybe 14, 15, somewhere in there. So we won't know, right, what the unemployment rate is for April we won't know really what it is at the end of March. We will know what it is at the beginning of April or second week of April, but we won't have that information for another month or so. We do get more frequent updates about the jobs reports numbers, so you'll see the number of people, both the jobs reports and the people filing for unemployment claims. So we do have a better estimate of how many people have filed for unemployment claims, not better, but like more recent, and that seems to be quite high. So we shall see in about a month what has happened to the unemployment rate, but my guess is that it would be around 15% for April. All right, so now we want to think a little bit more about how we interpret the unemployment rate, who gets included in the unemployment rate and who doesn't get included in unemployment. Now, again, this number is based on these questions in a very specific survey, and they're asked in a very specific way. So in the unemployment numbers that you hear reported in the news, the only people who are counted as unemployed are people who are not employed, right? They are not working at all for pay or profit, not even 20 bucks, right? And they are actively looking for work. Actively looking for work. Okay, so they have to have done something to look for work in the last 4 weeks. Okay, so those are the two criteria that we need to fulfill in order to be counted as unemployed. And then there are a number of people who we might be concerned about who are not included in these unemployment numbers, right? So for example, we might be worried about people who are underemployed. Maybe you mowed your neighbor's lawn and you got 20 bucks last week, but you're looking for a job, right? That person, you might consider them unemployed, but in our survey data, they are not going to be counted as unemployed because they did have work for pay or profit. We call these people underemployed because they're employed, but they're not employed to their full desire or capacity. And so we can look at those. We have numbers about how many people we might count as underemployed, and we can look at those numbers as well. And then the last category is discouraged workers. And this has been a big issue following the last recession, where we had a really slow recovery. People had been unemployed for a very long time. Some of them just exited the labor force, right? So you have people who, after a year of looking for work, just give up. They would like to have a job, but they're not actively looking anymore. That person would be considered a discouraged worker. And again, we have some information, some data about how many people would fall into that category as well. That's not going to be included in our primary measure of unemployment. We have, of course, lots and lots of different measures of unemployment, but I'm just trying to give you a sense of what you're reading in the newspaper here. All right, so the next thing we want to talk about is, what does unemployment mean? When I see a high unemployment number, how do I interpret that? Or why is that happening? What is the ideal unemployment rate? And how can I think about the government's role in trying to maintain a functioning labor market? So I'd like to talk a little bit about these different types of unemployment. But rather than have you just watch me here, I'd like to have you watch 3 videos from Marginal Revolution, one about each of the different types of unemployment. And this is going to give you a really good picture of how economists approach thinking about different types of unemployment. So go ahead and watch these 3 videos about unemployment. Then we'll come back together. I'll give you some main takeaways, and we'll conclude this topic.